Hi, I'm Jared the Wyrd-worker. I've been practicing witchcraft for just over 2 decades, and in this video, I want to talk about planning rites and rituals as a beginner. This video is in response to a request by Twitter user Holy Apologetics. The first thing I'd like to talk about is that I'm using two different words here, rituals and rites. They describe very similar and often interrelated concepts, and yet there are differences in ways that we should really consider and think about. A rite is a formal ceremonial usually having some sort of religious or spiritual significance or intent. What makes a rite a ritual is when it is repeated and there is a purpose behind that repetition. Now, you can find rituals outside of religion and magical rites. If you get out of bed and put on your clothes in a very particular order every morning, that's a ritual. The purpose may be because you think the order in which you put your shirt and bottoms on affect the kind of day you'll have. Or maybe it's how you make sure that you don't forget to put something on. That's why I would do it. The point is, it becomes a repeated pattern that becomes familiar, and that familiarity can be very powerful. And it becomes especially powerful in doing spiritual or magical work. There are great benefits if you, for example, choose to call the quarters using the same words every full moon, rather than calling the elements one month, Celtic deities the next one, and elemental rulers on the third month. This doesn't mean there's no room for experimentation or improvisation in your rites. There absolutely is. Part of that experimentation, however, is finding the right balance between the rituals within your rites that should remain constant and unchanging, and the parts that can or even should be new every time. To give you a concrete example with my old Coven's full moon rites, our rites used to have the same basic liturgy to cast the circle, call the elements, and invoke the virtues and the divine. The words might change slightly, partly because we all hated rote memorization and adopted a close enough approach. But we all knew we'd be calling Merlin in the north, and we'd mention the element of earth during that call. We'd also take down the circle at the end of the rite using the same pattern. But the middle part, what we call the working, and is often called the working, would be different every time. Sometimes one of us might lead everyone in a guided meditation. Other times we'd perform a spell together that we agreed on. Sometimes we'd welcome new members or say goodbye to those who had decided it was time to move on. When planning a rite, it's important to figure out what you hope to accomplish with the rite. Are you trying to work magic toward a goal? Or are you looking to gain wisdom or insight? Or are you seeking to honor the divine? If it's that last one, are you looking to honor a particular deity, a group of specific deities, or a more general concept of the divine? Which brings me to my very first tip. Don't try to do it all in a single rite. Rites are more effective when they have a single primary purpose. That word primary is intentional. It's okay to acknowledge and briefly honor the divine in a rite where you plan on doing magic. In fact, I encourage it. But if you try to spend 10 minutes singing the praises of Athena and then do a money spell after that, you're doing too much. Do a separate rite for each of those two things. Once you figure out what you hope to accomplish in your rite, it's time to start planning how to perform it. Rites are like stories. They have 3 basic parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Your beginning is meant to prepare you for the rite by shifting your state of mind, entering what some call a ritual state of consciousness, and focusing on your goal in the act of meeting it. This is where you do things like cleanse yourself with smoke, asperge yourself with salt water, and anoint yourself with oil. The beginning of a ritual also includes those acts which create your magical space, like casting a circle and calling the quarters. It's important to note that you don't have to do all those things for every rite. In fact, you don't have to do them for any rite. Personally, when I'm working alone, I never call quarters. Calling quarters doesn't really make sense in the context of the Germanic path I follow. The elements don't really fit well in my tradition. That's something you should think about when you consider what ritual elements to include in any of your rites. Don't do something just because that's what witches do. Understand why you do it and make sure that the why is meaningful to you in the way you do things. Over time, your ritual elements should start to work together to form a cohesive and beautiful practice. This is why I recommend that beginners keep things simple when they're first starting out. There sometimes seems to be this mentality that a complex rite with all kinds of things going on is more powerful or effective. Simple rites with even just one or two carefully chosen and deeply meaningful ritual elements can be incredibly powerful and effective. When considering what ritual elements to include in a particular rite, consider what you're trying to accomplish, what your time constraints are, and if you're working magic, what your level of urgency is. Are you trying to honor the divine? You can do that in a lengthy rite where you cast a circle, call the corridors, and invoke the divine. Or you can sit quietly at your shrine or altar and take a few deep breaths before you say a prayer and make an offering. Do you really need to cast a circle to do that? I've met witches who seem to think they do, and you'll have to decide what your personal answer to that question is. No matter how you decide to answer that question, I would encourage you as a beginner to keep your own rites on the simple side at first. Once you've gotten through the beginning part of the rite, you're ready to tackle your purpose in the middle. Once again, think about what you're attempting to accomplish and figure out what you need to do in order to accomplish it. If you're looking for insight, how are you going to accomplish it? Will you do a tarot reading? Think about what spread you will use. Are you going to, and I recommend this, write down your reading as well as your thoughts about it? Then you better make sure you have a writing implement and something to write on. Maybe a special journal for such readings. Are you going to honor the divine? Think about what you're going to offer. Food, incense, poetry, songs, prayers. Once you've finished the middle portion of your rite, it's time to think about the end. The goal of an end in the rite is to wrap things up and get back to a state of mind where you can tackle those dirty dishes in the sink. I know if you're like me, you don't want to tackle the dirty dishes in the sink even before you started your rite, but I trust you get my point. If you've done any work to create magical space, like casting a circle, the end part of your rite is where you do work to undo that creation process. This sends a message to your psyche that you're done. Also, it's not good to leave magical spaces around, as that can mess with you over time. If the starting portion of your rite was more simple, like closing your eyes and taking a deep breath, your ending may be equally simple, like blinking a couple of times or shaking your head a little bit like you're trying to clear your head. I will mention that Deb Lipp has a wonderful book called Elements of Ritual that breaks down the process of designing and planning rituals as a process of working through the elements. I highly recommend it if you're looking for a more detailed and thorough look at the process. Also, I did a video about the whys and hows of circle casting, which will provide another concrete example of working through the questions involved. Click on the thumbnail over to the side to check it out. Until next time, blessed be.